Hi, in this video I'm going to discuss the current state of affairs with Retribution Paladins in Mythic Plus and Mythic Dungeons with some advice on talents and how best to use our utility. Now when it comes to dungeons, of course, and at the moment as I say this, we're into the first week of Mythic Plus being available. With it being a fortified week especially, we can note that on trash in AoE type situations it's very variable. Sometimes our AoE is decent and sometimes it is not at all. There's definitely work to be done with our AoE, and the Blizzard developers do know this as well, and although there's a few ideas floating around, nothing as yet has happened, and given that it hasn't happened at this point, I'm beginning to suspect that it may have to wait for patch 8.1, because we know that they'd said about a couple of other specs, most notably Shadow Priests and potentially Enhancement Shamans, and I strongly suspect Feral Druids wanted some attention as well, that changes may not come where there needs to be a change to the core mechanics until patch 8.1. So something could happen any moment, or it may not happen until then. In the meantime, we'll just have to get on with it. So although AoE can be a little bit iffy, we do have nonetheless some strength. We're not going to be taken for the world first pushing the super high keys, but nonetheless we can be very strong within our own groups pushing moderately high keys if that's what you're into. Now when it comes to damage, we may not be always reliable when it comes to AoE, but we can be very good when it comes to bursting important things down. Avenging Wrath is a very strong cooldown, and it can allow us on a tricky trash pack to be able to use that very early on. Do not save Avenging Wrath necessarily for bosses. What you want to be doing is to think about what's coming up. If the trash that you are on is much more difficult than the boss that's coming up, or if you're likely to lose more time on it if it doesn't go well than the boss that's coming up, then you absolutely want to be favouring using Avenging Wrath right now. It's nice to have Avenging Wrath when a boss comes up, and of course if it is a boss that's quite nasty and you do want to get a particular phase out of the way, then of course you do want to save Avenging Wrath for that. It's always a case of thinking, when is it most important to do it? But you also don't want to be going through 5 or 6 minutes of trash without ever having used your Avenging Wrath. You could have used it several times and still had it for the boss. At the same time, whether you choose to use it on cooldown is up to you, but I tend to like to keep it a little bit in the tank. Again, if you know what's coming up, sometimes I'll think to myself, this trash pack after this can sometimes be a little bit tricky. I might just save it for then, and if the shit hits the fan, absolutely throw your Avenging Wrath out. If you were saving it for anything, if something goes a little bit wrong, it has the potential to wipe you. So even if you were wanting to use it on something that you know can be tricky about a minute down the line, you probably need to use it at that time because it can actually save the situation. When it comes to utility, we have a few extremely useful ones. Now, just like in Legion, a lot of our utility that I have always said is extremely poor for Mythic raiding is actually very good for Mythic dungeons. So one example is Cleanse Toxins. Now, in Mythic raiding, there's very rarely any poisons that need a lot of attention, and where there is, usually the healers can take care of it. However, in dungeons, not only is there poison that can be quite nasty, and what I've noticed in the BFA dungeons so far, poison is a much nastier mechanic in a lot of dungeons as compared to the Legion dungeons, and you can very easily find yourself as the only person that can actually get rid of poisons especially, but also potentially diseases. I have been using this a lot in the group I've been running with.
Oh, poison ratio.
Sometimes it's been absolutely mental. It racks up in about 2 seconds.
Full stacks again, like what the fuck?
This is so retarded.
So in a group where you are the only one that can cleanse poisons, or even if not, sometimes so many people get poisons, or the poisons come so quickly that even working as a tag team is very beneficial as well. Some of the poisons in some of the dungeons can easily be killing tanks, and of course that could potentially lead to a wipe, and certainly lead to a loss of time. Word of Glory is also almost mandatory, I would say. I would always take Word of Glory in a dungeon with a group that I know where we're going to be doing content that for us is going to be challenging. And don't be afraid to use it as well. Absolutely use it. I have sometimes complained that it's annoying that it's on a 1 minute recharge and that it costs holy power. In fact, there's situations where sometimes I need to use it, but I haven't got the holy power and I've got to build up the holy power first. And sometimes someone has died while I've been trying to do that. But what I tend to view the situation is now it's loads better than it was in Legion. If anything's a bit iffy, if people are on half health, if the tank's on half health and you're not sure the healer's completely on top of it, lots of things going wrong, use your word of glory. Don't wait until everyone's on like 5% health and think, oh, it's an emergency heal. I don't even necessarily view it as just an emergency heal. I view it as something, if I just have a feeling that things are not going particularly well, then I'm straight onto, I think I'm going to use word of glory here, especially if multiple people are in a little bit of trouble on the health there. Lay on Hands, of course, has a much longer cooldown. I tend to take Unbreakable Spirit, but more about the talents later, which gives it a 7-minute cooldown. But nonetheless, it is one of those, if a tank is looking in real trouble, then you want to be using it on then. If you're in real trouble and the tank isn't, then use it on yourself as well. Don't save it for yourself, thinking to yourself, okay, well, maybe the tank will be in trouble in a few minutes' time. No, if you're in trouble right now, put it this way. If you die, then the Lay on Hands is gone anyway. So it's not available to anyone. So make sure that you are using it on people if you think they are in serious danger of dying. In a raid type situation, you've got a team of healers and you generally can have faith that they are going to be on top of things in a way that isn't always the case in a dungeon because you've only got one healer. If that healer is stunned, or if they're having to deal with something difficult themselves, or if they're very strong at single target healing, not so much the others, and loads of people are taking loads of damage, then they're going to be really up against it. And do you know what? We have the tools to help out in these situations. And what I've been finding is I've been using these abilities, I would say, more frequently than I did in Legion. It's very difficult to compare because, of course, now I'm a casual as opposed to when I was a Mythic Raider doing these in Legion. Blessing of Protection. It is an ability that I put scorn on when it comes to Mythic Raiding because it'll be useful on 2 or 3 fights in the whole expansion. But for dungeons, it's frequently useful. Just as in Mythic Raiding, you have hardly any physical mechanics that are likely to kill people. In Mythic Dungeons, this happens a lot. It's particularly useful against fixate mechanics. So boss fixates on a particular person, particularly if it's someone like a healer or a ranged, you can just put Blessing of Protection on them. That almost certainly deals with the problem, allows them to stand still and ignore the whole thing. But even in a situation where you think the healer might get mugged by ads or the tank's just died, something like that, you can save a situation if a tank dies, and it might be beneficial if the healer's still there to just put Blessing of Protection on them while you then try and deal with what ads you can. Now, when it comes to using these sorts of abilities, it's absolutely essential that you have some sort of mouse over ability to do so, rather than always having to click the individual players. And I suggest the add-on Click for this. I have got a guide for its use in my add-ons playlist. It is one that I'm going to be updating in the next week, but nonetheless, the one I produced that's up there at the moment, if you're watching this as soon as it's come out, is still valid. It still works in basically the same way, and it's an absolutely essential add-on, I would suggest, for any good utility spec for dungeons. I'd also strongly recommend it for Ret Paladins for raids, quite frankly. Now, when it comes to Flash of Light, this is not a great heal, but bear in mind it is still a heal, and if you empty your mana, you're not going to use your mana for anything else, then it can be useful. It can get yourself out of a tricky situation in a few cases, or even someone else out of a tricky situation. So you have a lot of tools for dealing with situations, just like other classes that have a healing spec. But I think Retribution Paladins, for dungeons, in a way that just doesn't work for raids, are really useful for this sort of thing. You can actually save a situation with Flash of Light. If the healer's dead, use it to quickly top up their tank. If everyone's dead or the tank's actually in decent shape but you're not, then just stand still and use it on yourself. Remember, there's no point in just tunneling the DPS, because if you die, your DPS stops as well. Now, when it comes to talents, on the first row, I would just basically look at Zeal. If you're looking at the other two, at the moment, Righteous Verdict is pure single target. The only time I would take that is maybe on a tyrannical week where you know you're absolutely going to go through the trash. There's not going to be any issues on the trash, and you know that there's going to be at least one boss that actually could make or break your Mythic Plus run. Execution Sentence at the moment is not that competitive, but of course anything can change there. Onto the second row, it can be largely personal preference, but Simit, I have been finding that Blade of Wrath is the most useful. Blade of Wrath, of course, has applications for both single target and AoE. It's extremely useful for that sort of thing. But, you know, I've been thinking about the next time I'm going to go into some Mythic Plus, maybe taking Hammer of Wrath as well. If you do take Hammer of Wrath, because the way I'm thinking of it, I've got the trait which allows my Divine Storms on a target during execute to give me a strength buff. That, of course, is going to buff Hammer of Wrath as well, which is usable at the same points. But if you are taking Hammer of Wrath, and whether or not you've got that trait, do bear in mind that if you're on trash, you want to be targeting low health mobs at all times. Don't have a situation where you're targeting one mob and you've got a low health mob next to you, because Hammer of Wrath is not active there, but target the other mob and all of a sudden you can be using Hammer of Wrath. On to the next row, it can very much depend on what your group's going to need. The Fist of Justice is the default choice, but Repentance could be useful, but it's only going to be useful if you know your group is likely to do some crowd control of certain mobs and pull others back. Blinding Light could be really useful just to deal with an emergency situation as well, to give yourself a few seconds respite while you sort yourselves out. On to the next row. Divine Judgment at the moment is not competitive, and in fact, if Blizzard decide to do anything about our AoE, whether it be soon or whether it be patch 8.1, they could do something to change Judgment, or they could do something to change Divine Judgment, but at the moment this is not really competitive. Consecration can be, and Consecration can sim to be the best, and if you've got a situation where you've got trash packs balled up very efficiently and you know they're not going to be moving around a lot, then it can also be very good. But things do tend to move around in dungeons, and you may prefer the more reliable Wake of Ashes. I certainly tend to go with Wake of Ashes because the sims for me, whether it's Hectic Adcleave or Patchwork, can be a little bit marginal between the two anyway, and I tend to just prefer Wake of Ashes for its reliability there. But at the same time, I'm not opposed to trying out Consecration on a few potentially later on. On the next row, I'd already said I'd take Unbreakable Spirits. The ability to use Bubble more often. I will try and use Bubble liberally if I can in Mythic Plus dungeons. There's an awful lot of situations where you're going to be in terrible trouble. Cavalier, unless you're doing easy dungeons where you just go from trash pack to trash pack, you're not likely to need Cavalier. You're not likely to need speed boost at all that much, because you're going to be working slowly through the trash packs. If you're doing easy dungeons, then of course that's fine, but then if you're doing easy dungeons, does it really matter about a few seconds extra sprint? Eye for an Eye could be really useful. I've already said physical damage is much more of an issue, but it tends to be more of an issue in an emergency situation where maybe the tank dies or something like that. So what I tend to prefer is take Unbreakable Spirit, because Bubble will be useful in more situations. But I could certainly understand people maybe taking Eye for an Eye now and then. On to the next row, I think it's got to be Word of Glory. I cannot make a case at all for Selfless Healer, what I call now Selfish Healer, even though you can use it on another player. Word of Glory is just so good. You can do so much good with Word of Glory, and even though you can't use it as much, well, Selfless Healer doesn't get its benefit unless you're also spending Holy Power anyway. So I would always take Word of Glory. Justicar's Vengeance is of absolutely no use whatsoever. Realistically, in these situations, it's certainly not going to help anyone else, and it's touch and go whether it would even realistically help you. On to the final row, I would suggest for Mythic Dungeons, it's going to be between Divine Purpose and Inquisition. You can be led largely by Sims if you wish. Again, tends to be a mixture of Hectic Adcleave Sims for trashy type situations, Patchwork for most bosses at any rate. I tend to go with Divine Purpose in Mythic Dungeons in a way that if it was marginal, I wouldn't at all for Mythic Raiding. The reason I say that, in Mythic Raiding, sometimes you have to do a very specific amount of burst in a short window, and Divine Purpose will let you down at those times, whereas Inquisition doesn't. But in a Mythic Plus dungeon, there are much fewer of those super important tiny burst windows. It's more about the overall time to take and to do the dungeon. So Divine Purpose, I just quite like that. I think it's very beneficial. And it actually helps our AoE. It's something that will actively help our AoE. It's very nice to be able to suddenly get a free Divine Storm or something like that as well. Now, when it comes to targeting dungeons, there isn't a lot of point for most of the dungeons, because Azerite gear, once we're doing Mythic Plus dungeons, Azerite gear doesn't drop from those. We can only get those from our weekly Mythic caches. So unless you're doing normal, heroic, or just mythic naught dungeons, yeah, you can't target for the particular Azeroth gear you want. But trinkets and weapons are also really important. So when it comes to weapons, then the main one of note is from King's Rest, and it's called the Cut of Death. That is the one, if you're going to target a dungeon for a weapon, then that's the one you would want to target.
Me too. I got pants. Weapon.
Oh! Oh! I'll live.
Congratulations.
You are done well.
When it comes to trinkets, Jess's Howler is a lovely little trinket. Not only is, at the moment, is it simming actually very nice just in terms of our personal damage, if you look at the way it functions, it's also beneficial for your group, and particularly for a dungeon group. So the fact that it's actually very strong for us personally from a selfish point of view, but also beneficial to a group as well, makes this an ideal trinket to be targeting if you can, and this one drops from Tol Dagor. Hasn't dropped for me as yet, even though, ironically, I did manage to get it drop in the beta. Sod's law. So I hope you enjoyed this little look at Ret Paladins in Mythic Dungeons. Again, hopefully a few things will change in terms of our AoE, but those changes may not come super quickly. At the same time, I've certainly felt useful in the dungeons at the level I'm doing them at anyway. Let me know what experiences you've been having in the comments below. Maybe we'll be able to follow it up with some more specific advice as well. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.
Stick to the wall.
I can't get up.
Does this mean we're going to end up with multiple things now? We've got
Why are
things
you running
behind.
in the middle?
Oh yeah,
things.
wait. I didn't know.
I said stick to the wall.
I'll
I
get the
did- I
worm,
did.
get the
He's
worm.
literally aggro all the time.
Yeah, because you don't stick to the wall.
No, because he can't fucking run past.
Do you wanna bet? Watch me, bitch.
Oh, we're not in combat with those worms.
Yes.
I need the heals.
That's all I've got.
Yeah, you
Abyssal
can't
reach.
get any hits, you know.
Abyssal Reach. Maddening Gaze.
Eat the food.
Eat the poo-poo.
Abyssal Reach.
Oh!
Abyssal Reach. Maddening Gaze.
Am I still alive? I am so
Maddening
good.
Gaze. Abyssal Reach.
Alright, hang on.
Maddening Gaze.
Beware.
Alright, another heal coming in.
Big.
Maddening Gaze. Abyssal Reach.
I believe in Thete!
Use the bubble thing. Do your thing.
Do the things! Do the
That's the only bubble I've got left.
Cross Ignition.
Pop
Massive
is
Blast.
broken.
Cross
Yes, Deeps! Kill him! Knight the king!
Attack.
No!
The attack people take. Rip my dude.
Oh,
Azrite Realms.
Come on! Come on, you can do it!
yeah.